The first paper, there will be 3 papers in this session. The first paper is titled A Deep Analysis of 2 Glitch-Free Hardware Masking Schemes, SESIM and LMDPL. The authors are Nikolai Müller, Daniel Lammers, and Amir Moradi. And the speaker is Daniel Lammers. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the kind introduction, and welcome to this talk. So as mentioned, this is a work where we looked at 2 existing hardware masking schemes, self-synchronized masking and LMDPL, and this is a joint work with one of my colleagues and a supervisor. So let's start with some motivation first. Sidechain analysis attacks are a threat for practical implementations of cryptography because an adversary might be able to observe physical effects during the operation of some physical device. And this can, for example, be power consumption and timing effects that can then be exploited to extract some secret information. Several countermeasures have been proposed in the recent years, but all of these come at a cost. So they increase the area and also come with some latency overhead to fulfill some security claims. And regarding these security, what we ideally would like to have are security guarantees using so-called formal models to be sure that an implementation, independent of the physical platform where it's deployed on, is going to be secure in practice. So one of the most prominent countermeasures is masking, and in the context of this talk, this is referred to as Boolean masking, which is commonly applied on the algorithmic level. And here the idea is to randomize intermediate values such that the power consumption is independent of the actual data that is being processed. And how this is achieved is that for a d-order secure circuit, the sensitive variable is split into d+1 shares. And there's a small example here on the right side, as I'm going to stay in the first order security in this talk. There's a sharing of x0 and x1, where one of the shares is equal to the randomness, and the other share is the data that is protected, x or the randomness. So when implementing Boolean masked circuits, a critical role here are the nonlinear functions, because based on the nature of these functions, they need to recombine the shares in some secure way. And a pitfall here are glitches. So if inputs are applied to the circuit, then the according signals propagate through the circuit. And because there are some timing imbalances, this can actually cause some back and forth toggling. And this is directly visible in the power traces until the circuit then eventually reaches a stable state. And because this is data dependent, this is also exploitable in practice. So a common approach to mitigate this is to use register stages, but this comes then with the downside that it increases the latency. Okay. So to formally prove that these circuits are secure, we use formal models. For example, the D-probing model, which gives the adversary the possibility to place up to D probes on circuit wires. And then if no tuple of these D observation spots gives any information about secret variables, then a circuit is considered to be D-order secure. However, this model does not cover any additional physical effects, for example, the glitches that I just explained. So a follow-up work also introduced the robust deprobing model, which, for example, covers the glitches using glitch extended probes. So now this works as follows. Again, an adversary is able to place up to D probes in the circuit, and then these are virtually backpropagated up to the last synchronization point and the primary inputs of the circuit, such that in this model, an adversary also learns about all of these inputs. And of course, for example, if we want to compose sub-circuits like in gadget-based masking, then we use composability notions to ensure that the security claims also hold for arbitrary compositions. Another common countermeasure is dual-rail precharge logic, or in short, DRP. And this is originally intended to equalize the power consumption of the device. So this works in the following way, that a sensitive variable x is represented by 2 rails, the true and the false rail. And here we have 3 valid states in this protocol. On the left side, we can see the null token, where both of the rails are set to 0. And in the middle 2 cases here, The true rail corresponds to the original value, and the false rail always corresponds to the inverted value. And then during execution of this scheme, alternating pre-charge and evaluation phases are applied to the circuit. And how this looks like is visible on the bottom right here. So first, a pre-charge phase is applied such that both of the rails are set to 0. Then in the consecutive clock cycle, an evaluation phase is done, where here x is equal to 0. And then in another clock cycle, again, the rails are resetted. And what we can observe here, because this is true for all of the intermediate values in the circuit, the complete circuit follows a monotonic behavior, meaning that all of the glitches are eliminated in the entire circuit. Now, a way to implement this in hardware is to use wave dynamic differential logic, or WDDL in short, which is a gadget-based logic style that implements these DRP principles. And these gadgets themselves, they utilize cells from the standard cell library. So for example, on the bottom left, we can see a WDDL AND gadget, which basically computes the two rails for the AND output. However, there is a known flaw with this in the literature, which is known as the early propagation effect. So let's consider the false rail of the output here. We can see that this is computed by an OR gate. And now let's assume we are in a pre-charge phase where both of the inputs are resetted. Then the first input that is given to this gate is going to determine the output. And what this means is that the gadget is going to evaluate its output independent of some of these inputs. So several works have tried to mitigate this, and one introduced a no early evaluation variant, which we can see here in the middle. And here the idea is that each of these AND gates we can see there take one rail of both variables into consideration, and that this means that it is ensured that both of the variables arrived at the gadget such that the gadget can evaluate its outputs. And on the right side, we can also see the WDDL XOR implementation. Now, 2 years ago here at CHES, the self-synchronized masking scheme was introduced, and it builds up on top of these principles. So it uses this DRP protocol and also the WDDL gadgets. And by this, it implements a single cycle masking scheme for arbitrary orders. And here it should be noted that the robust deprobing model assumes glitches on all of the inputs. This doesn't really apply here in a proof, because in the glitch-free circuit, there are simply no glitches that can propagate. So what is done here is that it is shown to be deprobing secure. Implicitly, glitches are covered, and this also covers transitions. And the implementations have been shown to be formally secure using the tool Coco, which was slightly adapted for this use case to handle the WDDL gadgets. And how the scheme works at an abstract level is visible here at the bottom in the image. So first, the single array inputs are converted into a dual array representation. Then a pre-charger applies either the null token or the actual data to a masked circuit. And then the result is forwarded to some C elements, which just hold the output stable. And in parallel, a completion detector checks if all of the output shares of the masked circuit are computed. And if this is the case, then after the evaluation, a pre-charge wave is directly triggered, resulting in a single cycle masking scheme. So this masked circuit can be realized in 2 steps. It builds up on existing hardware masking schemes like domain-oriented masking, and here the gates are replaced by the WDDL gadget counterparts. And then in the second step, the registers are removed, as the assumption is that glitches do not occur in the circuit, so they can also not propagate, and we don't need any registers to stop them. Okay, let me also quickly talk about LMDPL, which is the second scheme we looked at. So this is a scheme that is bound to first order security, and it is shown to be composable secure under the one glitch extended strong non-interference notion. And it is constructed in the following way. So it is divided in 2 layers. The upper part is the mask table generation layer. And this layer operates on the single rails of the first share inputs. And for nonlinear functions, it also takes some random bit into consideration for each nonlinear function. And then based on the first shares, some intermediate values are computed and are all blinded by the same random bit. and stored in a register in between the layers. So then the operation layer, this actually operates in dual rate precharge, meaning that when the intermediate values are computed in the upper layer, the lower layer is precharged. And then in a consecutive cycle, an evaluation is done based on the second shares. And what this means is that if we now cascade different gadgets of this type, we get a constant latency for arbitrary circuits. And also the authors came up with an AES architecture where each round in the AES only takes a single cycle to evaluate. So now we looked at both of these schemes in our lab. We implemented them on some FPGA platform. And in the top here, we can see the original ASIC design results of a fixed versus random t-test. And as you can see on the top left, this is the result of an AES box. And as you can see at the top left, the evaluation and pre-charge phases have been separated clearly using some FSM. And on the top right, you can see that we can clearly distinguish the fixed and random data sets in this t-test after 1 million traces, which should not be the case in our measurements. And at the bottom, you can also see the results of the original FPGA design by the authors. This essentially implements the same, but it directly instantiates LUTs and uses pre-charge signals that are directly connected to those LUTs. And after 100 million traces, we can still distinguish between these two data sets. We also looked at LMDPL, and as you can see here, we didn't find any observable leakage in practice. And as now both of these schemes rely on the same DRP principles to achieve low latency, the question arises why one seems to have practical security while the other doesn't, even though this is shown to be D-order secure, covers glitches implicitly, and also covers transitions. So to explain the underlying issue, let me start with a small example here. This is again the WDDL AND gadget. And at the bottom, we can see all the 4 input cases for this gadget. So now let's consider only the bottom row here, the false rail computation. As you can see, the left 3 cases are 1 and the most right one is 0, which is what we would expect for an AND gadget on the false rail. And here we are in an ideal world where no delays occur. So no delays by the routing and no delay by the gates. And now for simplicity, we just induce a single delay at one of the input rails. And what we can see is that this directly propagates to the output. So now if we again look at the false rail, and for example, an adversary observes the false rail at the output, then based on the time this false rail is toggled to 1, all of these 4 cases are distinguishable. And we can continue this and do the same experiment with the WDDL XOR. And here, because this is an XOR, we cannot distinguish between 2 of the output cases because they don't toggle to 1, but we can distinguish between the other 2. So this is a known issue. This is the early propagation effect that I previously mentioned. But now let's see how this affects the recently proposed scheme if we assemble both of these gadgets together. So this is 1/2 of a self-synchronized masking multiplier, where the gates have been replaced by the WDDL gadget counterparts, and the registers have been removed. And for simplicity, we also only consider 2 delays, delta 0 on the true rail of the 0 share of y, and delta 1 on the true rail of the first share of y. And we also only look at the true rail computation here at the output. And this means that we only consider the inputs that are actually going to cause a toggle at this output rail, such that we can observe the time it takes it is going to toggle. And here are the results. So in the left part, you can see the unshared inputs. And in the second block, you can see the shares and the randomness that are given to the circuit. And in the right block, in the left column, this is the delay it takes for the output to toggle. In the rightmost column, if we assume that delta 0 is smaller than delta 1, this is the average time for each unshared input case until the output is going to toggle. And as you can see here, the cases are clearly distinguishable. So if y equals to 0, then the average time it takes is delta 1 divided by 4. And if y equals 1, then it is delta 0 plus delta 1 divided by 4. In the paper, the authors also recommend to use the no early evaluation variant. So instead of using the WDDL ends in this multiplier, we use no early evaluation variant, but the result is actually the same. We can still distinguish between these two cases. And because we can distinguish this, now we know our unshared inputs based on the time it takes for the output to toggle. We further continued with some practical measurements. This is a result of a Ketchak 5-bit Chi function, again with the self-synchronized masking, and we give the synthesizer full control of placement and routing, but not for any optimizations. And as you can see here, we actually don't see any observable leakage. This might be because this function is very small, and maybe the routing doesn't induce a lot of delay. So we assume that this is that the leakage we saw earlier is based because it's caused by a high difference in routing. So we try to examine our theoretical observations here also in practice. And what we do is that we induce delta 0 and delta 1 exactly as I described before for every multiplier in the netlist. And how we do this is we instantiate some LUTs that realize inverters in a chain. And these are the new results. And here we can again see clear leakage for both of the designs, for the normal WDDL engages at the top and the no early evaluation version at the bottom. Okay, so let me also talk about the LMDPL scheme and why it doesn't seem to have any issues with this. So actually in the original paper, the authors also found out that the robust deprobing model assumes glitches in the worst case manner. So they follow an argumentative approach. And let me quickly explain this to you. So on the right side, we have an image where the true rail computation for a nonlinear function is depicted. And if an adversary now places a probe at the output, then this probe is virtually backpropagated to all of these inputs. And because all of these TIs are blinded with the same render bit, we would be able to unblind them and trivially break the scheme. However, this doesn't really match what is actually happening in this DRP circuit. So as you can see, all of these AND gates have 3 inputs, and 2 of these inputs are a rail combination of the second share inputs. So what this means is that only one of these AND gates is actually going to evaluate to 1, such that only one of the TIs is going to propagate to the SI, which limits the propagation. And the TI is then blinded by some randomness, and this means that the time it takes for the output to toggle is independent of the unshared value. Yeah, and from this follows that LMDPL does not only stop the glitch propagation from the mass table generation layer to the operation layer, but it also implicitly stops the delays that depend on the unshared value. Okay, so let me conclude my talk. We re-evaluated the LMDPL and self-synchronized masking scheme here, as they both try to achieve low latency implementations using DRP principles. And we demonstrated that imbalance delays can cause a problem at the example of self-synchronized masking, even though it is shown to be D-order secure and also covers glitches and transitions. And we also tried the no early evaluation variant, which didn't change anything. So what we can conclude from this is that formal security proofs tend to be overly conservative, for example, by considering every possible occurrence of a glitch in circuit. And they also don't cover any imbalance delays to prove that this is actually secure formally. And a follow-up work, which is based on the observations we got here, is actually the robust but relaxed deprobing model, which is going to be presented here tomorrow. And this model looks at the transitions of each gate, and by this also implicitly covers the delays that are propagated through the circuit. Thank you very much. So feel free to ask any questions now or later.
Thank you, Daniel. So we have time for a few questions. Any questions? If you have any questions, you can go to one of these microphones. So maybe I can start. So Daniel, is there any way to solve this issue without putting registers into into the design?
No, I mean, both of these schemes deploy registers. It's just that in normal domain-oriented masking, the registers are placed in such a way that all of the intermediates are synchronized. And in LMDPL, it's just that the computation of each share happens separately. And based on this, the propagation is stopped. And I think this is the only way this is possible to stop. Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe also, I mean, for example, if we consider an AND gate where one of the inputs is set to 0 and the other input is glitchy, then and if the second input stays on 0, then the glitch is also going to be stopped by the second input. So this is also possible. Yeah, this is what's then allowed by the relax but robust programmable.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Okay. Let's thank the speaker again. So now we are going to the second talk. The paper is titled "Unlock the Door to My Secrets, but Don't Forget to Glitch: A Comprehensive Analysis of Flash Array Suppression Attacks." The authors are Mark Schink, Alexander Wagner, Felix Oberhansel, Stefan Köckeis, and Emmanuel Striede from Fraunhofer Institute, and Fraunhofer Isaac, and Sven Voigt and Dominic Klein from BSI. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction. In this talk, I present you an attack vector that targets the debug interface protection of many microcontrollers. This attack is actually not new, but gained almost no attention in the past. So with this research, we take a look into this attack vector and how good it performs under real-world conditions. Let me start with a quick introduction of how the attack vector works. So every modern microcontroller has a debug interface, which is used to develop your firmware on the microcontroller, debug your system, of course, but also deploy secret keys. And after this process, you usually want to lock your debug interface or at least restrict it, because otherwise an attacker would easily be able to extract your secrets from your device, for example, firmware or secret keys. So in this state, you have access to the microcontroller, but you cannot access, for example, flash memory where all your credentials are stored. And since nobody is perfect, there's also a way back. So we can also always go from limited debug access to full debug access. However, under the condition that the microcontroller first erase all the credentials and firmware and stuff like that on the microcontroller, of course. So how does the attack work? The attacker would gain access to the microcontroller, attach it via the debug interface, and then performs this transition from limited debug access to full debug access, and then inject the glitch in this erase operation, and hopefully end up with a microcontroller that is unlocked and not erased. As you can imagine, this is quite a critical operation, because if it doesn't work, all your data or secrets are lost. One remark here, or two, you don't need a success rate of 100% for this attack vector, because, for example, if it comes to firmware, stuff like that, you usually have multiple tries because you have many devices with the same firmware, so you can apply this attack multiple times on the same device, and if your success rate is 50%, then you need a couple of devices, and if you're then successful, you have the firmware, right? For unique device secret, of course, you need a success rate of 100%. Other remark is that some microcontrollers are able to fully disable the debug interface, which would a countermeasure against this attack. However, there are multiple reasons why you encounter devices with limited debug access in the field. For example, if you want to do something like failure analysis, then you're not able to fully disable your debug interface. The other reason is that there are known attacks that brings you from this disabled debug interface access to this limited debug interface access, and with this attack vector now from limited to full debug access. So with, for example, the publication in 2021, and this publication, we have now a full attack chain from disabled to full debug access. As I already mentioned, this attack is not new. So in 2005, this attack was already presented on an 8-bit microcontroller with voltage glitching. However, unfortunately, it was only a short paragraph in this dissertation, so with no details about success rate and stuff like that, only that this attack is possible. After this publication, we have seen a lot of microcontrollers in the market. Here only a few examples that we take a look in this research. And the question obviously is, did they learn something from this publication in 2005, right? In 2021, we already showed that at least for the STM32L4 microcontroller, this attack is possible with EMFI. But again, we unfortunately provided only limited information of this attack. So now, almost 20 years after the first publication, we have some numbers about success rate and stability of this attack vector for real-world attacks, so to say. Okay. Okay, so we have mainly 3 questions in this research. The first is we want to understand the vulnerability. What is the success rate of this vulnerability? And also, what is the performance with respect to different attack methods, in our case, voltage switching and EMFI? Then we want to see if this is a general problem. So for that, we analyzed 7 microcontrollers from different manufacturers. And also for this attack vector, very important, we want to understand if this attack is transferable. So since this is a critical operation, you do not want to prepare your attack on the actual target device, but you want to train and calibrate your setup on template devices and then perform the attack on the actual device, right? Because if you need a 100% success rate, then you have to tune your setup on many devices and then go to the actual device to attack it. For that, we analyzed this attack on at least 4 microcontrollers from every, so on 4 different microcontrollers for every device we analyzed. Okay, before we go into the details of the attack, one short introduction of how the flash erase operation works to understand the attack later and what we see later. What you can see on the right-hand side is a 1 transistor flash memory cell. And there you can encode 1 bit. Depending on the charge of the floating gate, you either have a 1 in the cell or a 0 in the cell. And I will go briefly of how this flash erase operation works, because it's quite a complicated operation actually. So let's assume our cell state is in logic state 1. Then what happens is that every cell that is not programmed in the flash memory is first programmed. So you have many bits, and all bits that are not programmed are programmed. In this case, there's a high voltage on the control gate, some voltage on a drain, and then you have some electrons going into the control gate. And if we do this for some time, then we end up in a cell state of logic 1. So all cells in the microcontroller are programmed first. Afterwards, the actual physical erase operation takes place. And in this case, all cells at the same time are erased. Remember that for flash memory, you can program individual cells, but you can only erase blockwise, right? And the reason why this has happened is that if you would perform only the physical erase operation and you have erased cells, then some cells would end up in a state which is called over-erased. And this would either damage or at least cause a malfunction of your flash memory. For that reason, the flash memory controller always performs this pre-programming operation. Okay, with this knowledge, let's take a look at what happens inside a microcontroller when we perform this transition from limited debug access to full debug access. What you can see here is the electromagnetic emanation of 1 microcontroller. The entire operation takes about 45 milliseconds. And there are 3 important parts in this EM trace. The first is here at the beginning. The second is in the middle. And the third is in the end. And what we see here is the first part is actually part of the erase operation of the flash memory. So here your firmware and cryptographic keys are erased. Then the second part shows you that here's the configuration erased. So the configuration stores the information whether your microcontroller is locked or not locked. And then at the end, you can see these 5 blocks. And this actually corresponds to the 5 option words in the flash memory, which encodes the information. So first of all the data you're interested in is erased. Then the configuration is erased. And then the configuration is pre-programmed or programmed with the state of full debug access. Okay, so what we have to do is we have to target the first operation without affecting the other two, because otherwise the device would not be unlocked. And if you do some more reverse engineering, so to say, you can determine that this block that we see here is the pre-programming phase that we saw before, and afterwards the physical erase phase. So let's take a look at this in more detail. That's the same trace, more or less, in detail. And at the bottom now you can see the amount of data that is not erased when we perform EMFI attack for 3 exemplary positions on the device. So you can see for most of the time the data is not erased, and if we inject the glitch at the end of the pre-programming phase, then we can see this drops, and in this state part of the flash is already erased, and we can see that many words in this flash memory are already 0, and we lose all the data. So we have to inject the glitch at the beginning of the pre-program phase or even before the pre-program phase for a successful attack. Okay, so again, EM trace, same EM trace, pre-programming phase, physical erase phase afterwards. And now let's see what happens when we inject the glitch. In this case, at this position. And now you can see the high amplitude. In this case, it's a voltage glitch. And then you can see that the amplitude of the pre-program phase is very low in comparison to the upper plot, where you can see the normal operation, so to say, without injected glitch. And if we zoom out, then you can see this even better. This is the EM trace from before with injected glitch, and here the comparison without injected glitch, and you can clearly see that the entire amplitude of this erase operation is very small. And our assumption is that we target the high voltage circuitry of the flash memory, and the flash memory controller is not able to perform the erase operation. So it tries to erase or pre-programs the flash memory, but has not enough energy, so to say. We do not skip something, because you can see this, the length is the same, but it's not able to discharge or pre-program the flash memory. Okay, let's take a look at some results from an STM32L162 microcontroller. The interesting part here is that's a dual bank flash microcontroller, so we have 2 separate flash memories in this device. And what you can see here for the first device is a heat map. So that's a grid scan from an EMFI experiment. And for each point, we performed 32 attacks. And it shows you that these blue dots shows you that we have a 100% success rate in this area. So when we perform this attack on this device 1, then we have 100% success that after this attack, we have the entire flash memory remain intact. So we can extract all the data from flash memory. If there is a single word that is already erased, then we consider this attack as not successful. So we have really the entire flash memory. Now the question is, what happens when we do this same attack on a second device? And we can see it looks a bit different. So it's the same area, but the shape is different. So that's why the transferability of this attack is important. For the third device, you can see, okay, it's similar shape, but the success rate is not highest, for example, as for device 2, but still okay. And now interesting is that, for example, for device 4, we see we have no effect at all, which is really interesting. And unfortunately, at the moment, we don't know why. We experienced similar results for another microcontroller of this family, but for all other devices, we experience this effect not for no other device. So maybe that's something with this device family, but at the moment we are not sure. So let's take a look at the superposition of all these results for this bank 0. Then we can see, okay, we have a success rate of 50-60% for this bank 0, which is quite okay. If you're an attacker and want to extract, for example, firmware, then you need a couple of devices and can extract the firmware. Let's take a look at bank 1. Here we can see we have a really large area on the top left with a success rate of 100%. And also we identified an area at the bottom, which is also at every single spot 100%. When we take a look at, somehow this doesn't work. Okay. At device 2, then we can see at the bottom also a large area with 100% success rate. Also for device 3. And now interesting, device 4, where we had no effect at all. We can see, okay, for some reason for bank 1, we have success in the top left corner. When you now take a look at the superposition again, then we can see for bank 1, in the bottom area, we have a large area with a success rate of 100%. In this case, you can place the EMFI coil by hand, so you don't need a XYZ stage for that. So you can place it by hand and perform the attack, and you have 100% success rate. Okay. As I mentioned, we performed this attack on many microcontrollers for VFI, so voltage glitching and EMFI. Let's start with the overall results for VFI. In this case, the success rate is quite bad, except for one device, the STM32L4 microcontroller. There we have a success rate of 100%. This really means 100%. So this is for 4 devices and for 1,000 attacks per device. So this is quite stable. I performed this attack many times on stage and it always works. For the other devices, we unfortunately, from a attacker's perspective, of course, have no success at all. However, when we take a look at the EMFI results, then we can see that we have for all devices at least a success rate of 50% or more. For 5 of 7 devices, we have spots with 100% success rate. For example, for the GD32E1 at the top right, we have 2 spots with 100% success rate. In this case, you need a template or XYZ stage because it's only one spot on the microcontroller that you need to target. For example, on the AT32F421 at the top middle, you have a large area again of a success rate of 100%. So here again, you can place the coil by hand or with small or easy tools. Okay, this already brings me to the end of my presentation with a few take-home messages. So if you're a product architect and use these microcontrollers or similar microcontrollers, you definitely should integrate this attack vector in your threat model because it can be quite powerful, as we have seen. If you're a chip manufacturer, then you should integrate countermeasures, for example, like a blank check of your flash memory before you perform the unlock operation. If you already have a product in the field, then it's quite tricky to apply mitigations because as I already said, even if your debug interface is disabled, there are attacks to reactivate it. And on many microcontrollers, you have 100% success rate. So it's hard to apply mitigations. Depending on your application, you can apply mitigations. We have some examples in the paper. However, when the attackers targets your firmware, then it's quite complicated because then you have usually multiple tries. Then you can apply something like obfuscation, but yeah. In general, you should consider these results as lower bound. So, for example, for the voltage glitching attacks, there are definitely parameters where you can tweak to improve the results, I think. So this is not the best an attacker could achieve, but a lower bound. That's it from my side, and thanks. I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Mark. Any questions? Mark? Use the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I think it's very interesting. I have a question. I have 2 questions, actually. The first one, when you do the cartography, I mean, the process that you scan the chip, you do it once or you repeat it several times and you average it?
Yeah. So you mean the heat map? Yeah, it's 32 attacks per position, and then for 4 devices.
Okay.
So for every device, 32 per position, and then the attack tested on 4 devices, at least 4 devices. For some microcontrollers, we have even more devices. Yeah.
No, I mean, when you do it per one chip, you do the heat map once, or you repeat the experiment several times on the same chip?
32 times.
32. Yeah. Okay, cool. The second question, when you do voltage glitching, you remember which was the level of the voltage that the chip was operating on? It was 3.2, or you tried to change it, for example?
Yeah, good question. For the basically it only works good for the STM32 L4 microcontroller. In this case, I think it was like 1.8 volt, so close to the lower bound of the minimum supply voltage.
Okay, you glitch one voltage source or several voltage sources together?
The digital domain. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Thanks for this interesting talk. I was wondering if you had maybe some communication with the vendor about the problems that you found?
Yeah, always. Yeah. So, sorry, what was yeah, we had communication and
what they said. What did they say?
Some manufacturers ignore us. Some told us that they weren't aware of this attack vector, which is a confirmation that this work is important to make this attack vector publicly. And I think one or two manufacturers asked us for the setup. So what kind of setup we use that they can reproduce the attacks. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We have time for more questions. I have a question. Could you please go back to your slide number 8, where you showed that one of the STM chips. Yeah. So device number 4.
Yeah.
I guess the answer is yes, but did you use the same PCB for all of these microcontrollers, or they were soldered on different PCBs, or maybe in different packages?
Good question. So this is 4 different PCBs hand soldered. So this also explains some of the variations of the results, right? But for device 4, it's not possible that you don't have. As it's not the reason is not that we hand soldered it, because and in the next slide you can see that we have good results here, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And regarding the package, so you did open the packages?
No. So for the EMFI, it's all closed packages, even with caps and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so completely unmodified, like
Okay.
recommended design from the manufacturers.
Thank you. No other questions? If not, let's thank the speaker again. So now we come to the last presentation of this session. The title is Who Watches the Watchers? Attacking Glitch Detection Circuits. The authors are Amund Askeland, Svetla Nikova, Vensislav Nikov. The floor is yours, Amund.
Thank you for the introduction. So yeah, my name is Amund. I'm a PhD student at the University of Bergen, and I'll be presenting this paper, which is joint work together with Svetla and Vensi. So in this paper, we evaluate or attack various glitch detection circuits, which are countermeasures against fault injection attacks. So just to start with some background, so in fault injection attacks, what we want to do is we provoke faulty computations in hardware, and some of these faults are exploitable. For example, faulty ciphertexts or incorrect branching in the microprocessors and so on. And perhaps the 2 most common, or at least 2 most classical methods for fault injection are voltage and clock glitching. And these 2 methods share the same underlying mechanism, which is to cause timing violations in the hardware. So then over to timing and hardware. So we often talk about this propagation delay, which is the time it takes for between when a change in the input of a combinatorial circuit propagates to the output. So one of the main reasons for this delay is various capacitances. So this could be capacitance in wiring, or the capacitance in the gates of transistors and so on. And we can model this as a single load capacitance at the output of a gate. So in this diagram, we have a transistor level drawing of an inverter gate. And then we can set up a model like this equation here. So the details are not too important, but we'll just note that this propagation delay is dependent on the supply voltage. So with a lower supply voltage, the circuit becomes slower. And of course, also as we build larger combinatorial circuits from this by chaining gates together and so on, this delay will increase. So from these combinatorial circuits, we typically build synchronous circuits. So that's when we hold the inputs and the outputs of combinatorial circuits with the registers. And here we've drawn it in as individual flip-flops, which are essentially single bit registers. And as we know, these flip-flops work by, so they're edge sensitive to a clock input. So whenever there's a rising clock edge, these flip-flops will sample the input, and this will then be transferred to the output and held until the next rising edge comes along. So this is a source for a strict timing requirement for synchronous circuits that we can draw as this model as this inequality here. So the thing is that the clock period has to be sufficiently large so that the circuit has it has to be larger, like the distance between two rising edges has to be larger than the combinatorial delay, which is the combined propagation delay. But also things like the clock to Q delay, which is essentially an internal propagation delay of flip-flops, and also the setup time, which is the time it takes or the amount of time that the input to a flip-flop has to be stable before a rising edge comes in order to guarantee a correct sampling. So this brings us to glitch detection circuits. The idea behind these circuits is that they're essentially sensors that can detect these timing violations. So what we want is to have sort of an alarm signal or a flag that can be raised whenever there's an attack. Then the remainder of the system can take the appropriate action to sort of prevent the attack. For instance, performing a full reset or refusing to release any outputs and so on. So in this work, we have taken a closer look at a family of detector designs. One of them, which is this in this figure here. So this detector works, well, on the left-hand side, we have this launch flop, which inverts its output on every rising clock edge. So there will, on every rising clock edge, there will be a fresh value on the output. It will change from 0 to 1 to 0 to 1 and so on. This will then propagate through two different paths with intentionally different delays. So one of them will have a high delay, here represented by a chain of buffers. And the other one will just be a direct connection. These two, like the signals in these two paths will then be compared using an XOR gate, so that if they're different, then the XOR will output a 1, and if they're equal, it will output a 0. So the idea then is that if the distance between two rising clock edges is sufficiently large, then this capture flop will sample a 0 because the signal will have propagated through both of the paths. But if the clock edges become too close together, then it will sample a 1 and raise the alarm. And then naturally also this long delay path can be tuned to set the threshold just right to protect the relevant circuits. So as I mentioned, this is a part of a family of designs. So here are 3 different designs we found in various papers. They're all based on the same concept of having this launch flop that inverts its output on every rising edge, and 2 parallel paths with different delay. But they have some differences in the number of flip-flops and the placements of these XOR gates and so on. They're different enough that when we have a closer look at them, we'll have to address them individually, but they're based on the same concept. So for the remainder of the talk, we'll refer to them as PDL1, 2, and 3 for parallel delay lines. So this brings us to some research questions. So first of all, in the relevant papers, these detectors are tested, and they certainly do work and can detect timing violations. But we ask whether there are situations where they can fail, and if so, can we then deliberately bypass these detectors? So we'll be doing some experiments, and just to explain our setup. Well, first of all, we'll be doing fault injection experiments, so we need a target. This will be represented by an AES implementation that we put on an FPGA. And on the same FPGA, we'll put the implementations of these detector designs with the goal of sort of protecting this AES implementation. So in our experiments, we will start encryptions, and then we'll apply glitches. We'll be using clock glitching in our experiments. And for each trial, we will record the correctness of the ciphertext, and we'll use that to determine whether or not a fault was injected. And we'll also record the detection flags of these detectors. And we'll use these two things to divide each trial into 4 categories, being negatives, false positives, and positives. And the problematic value in this case would then be the false negatives, meaning that a fault was injected, but no alarm was raised. So as I mentioned, we'll be using clock glitching in our experiments. So we'll add 1 or more glitches to a clock signal. And just to set up the parameters we'll be referring to, we use TG to refer to the time of extra rising edges relative to the previous normal clock edge, as per in the figure here. And we'll also do some double glitch attacks, and then we just use TG1 and TG2, also relative to the same edge. And also in our experiments, the margin, like the clock period, will be fairly large, so there's a comfortable margin, meaning that if you see look at the middle signal here, we can see there's actually 2 short clock periods, but we don't need to think about that here because of this large margin. Also, these clock signals, these glitchy clock signals, will be generated using FPGAs. And in the experiments I'll show here, it's been done on the same FPGA as the target. But in the paper, we have some discussions and some experiments using different boards and so on. So this is sort of representing a best case scenario. So then next we'll describe various methods where we think we might be able to bypass these detectors. And as we go along, we'll have a look at various results. So the first method targets the launch flop of PDL1 and PDL2. So the idea is that we'll try to use a glitch to prevent this launch flop from updating its value. And we'll try to do that by applying a glitch with where the value of TG is so low that it can break this the timing of this feedback path. And of course, we'll keep in mind that this should be a very fast path. So in our drawing here, we have a single inverter gate, but where available, this could also have used the inverted output of a flip-flop. But nevertheless, there will always be a certain delay, at least with like the clock to queue delay and wiring and so on. Yeah. As I mentioned, the experience will apply 1 single fast glitch and try with the goal of causing this launch flop to not change its output. And if you can do that, then from the point of view of this detector, it would be as if there were no extra glitch, even though there's a clear timing violation, and no alarm will be raised. Before we look at the results, we need to introduce a related attack. So this is related in the sense that it's also based on applying a single fast glitch, but this time the timing is a bit more relaxed. So now we want this launch flop to invert its output, and instead we target the fast delay path. So that's the direct connection from the launch flop and to the XOR. And the idea is that first the normal rising edge causes this launch flop to update its output value. But before the XOR output has reacted, we apply another glitch, causing this launch flop to sample a 0, even though it's a timing violation. And yeah, we can also see that this time in the timing diagram, it looks a bit more interesting. So the lower signal in the timing diagram, that's the capture flop input. And we can see that after this glitch, we have this behavior where the signal goes up and then down and then up again. And this is due to old pulses still propagating through the long delay path and so on. And that's something we'll revisit later. So let's have a look at the results. So first of all, to explain what we're looking at, what we've done here is that we have done a sweep of the value of TG. And for each value of TG, we have repeated an experiment a number of different times. So each vertical line in the plots represents a number of different experiments. So we can see that sort of the slope of these shapes indicate these, yeah, that there's some statistical differences. All the way on the right-hand side in the plots, we see an area of negatives, meaning there was no fault injected and no alarms were raised. So that's just when the value of TG is larger than the critical path. Then we have a band of false positives. So that's because the threshold of the detectors is set slightly higher than like it's a bit more sensitive than it needs to be. And then we have this area of positives, which is also where the detectors are working as intended. So we have injected faults, but the alarms are raised. Then all the way on the left-hand side, we see this area of false negatives corresponding to successful applications of attack 1 and 2. And we also see that for PDL1, it's quite a bit wider. That's because both attack 1 and 2 was applicable to this detector design, while for PDL2, only attack 1 was applicable, and that had a bit more strict timing requirements. So next we have some double glitch attacks. So in both of these previous experiments, we had fairly strict requirements on this TG timing. And when we're doing fault injection attacks, it's beneficial to have yeah, to be able to change the parameters in order to sort of try to provoke a useful fault. And we'll see that by using multiple glitches, we have some more options in the timing, and it's slightly more relaxed. So the first double glitch attack targets the output XOR of PDL2 and PDL3. So in both these detector designs, the inputs to this XOR gate is connected directly to flip-flops. And we then also assume that the output of this XOR is sampled synchronously, for example, by another flip-flop. The idea of the attack is that first we apply one glitch, which doesn't have very strict requirements at all, as long as it causes a timing violation. And then immediately after we fire another glitch. So what will happen is that the first glitch will cause these two capture flops to sample different values. But then we fire another glitch before the XOR output has been raised. So that means that no alarm will be raised because of this glitch, but the second glitch will also cause these two capture flops to sample equal values again. So the situation is sort of that first we fire one glitch causing a desired fault, and then another one to clean up after the first one. It's kind of a two wrongs make a right situation. So here we see the results for attack 3. So what we've done here is that we have fixed the value of TG1, the first glitch, and then we sweep the distance between the two glitches. So we see as they get sufficiently close together, we start seeing these false negatives. corresponding to attack 3. And then on the left-hand side of this region, we also start seeing positives again. That's due to a couple of different reasons, but at least on the far left in the figure, it's because, I mean, there's obviously a limit to how fast we can change the clock signal up and down and so on, like slew rate is a relevant parameter here. So when they get too close together, we have these analog filtering effects causing these glitches to merge into a single one, and then the attack no longer works. So the final attack is kind of what I alluded to earlier. It's an extension of attack 2. So what to do here is that first we apply one glitch that would have caused attack 1, now attack 2 on its own. So the first sort of inequality there describes the timing for the first glitch. And this first glitch will then open up a new window of opportunity where we can apply a second glitch without being detected. And yeah, I think it's a bit more easy to explain with using the figure. So this is the attack 2 timing diagram. So that's the signals after the first glitch. And we can see in the capture flop input again, no, the capture flop input, that this low region after the first glitch corresponds to then where we can apply another glitch without detection, which also, of course, would have caused a timing violation on its own. So here we have the results for this final attack. So we see this wide red region of false negatives in the middle. This corresponds to the low region in the timing diagram that I talked about on the previous slide. And on either side, we have regions of positives corresponding to the 2 pulses in the timing diagram. So on the far right, we also have some false negatives, but that's just when the value of TG2 becomes sufficiently large to not cause any problems on its own. And then this is then effectively reduced to attack 2 again. So just to end with a quick summary. So we saw in these experiments that these FPGA experiments that these glitch detectors can fail. So I'd also like to highlight that these attacks would not always be applicable. First of all, they require fairly fast changing clock signals, which is a challenge. And also they obviously require access to manipulate the clock signal, which is not always a realistic setting. And we can also note that it should be possible to improve these detector designs. So first of all, while we presented attacks against all 3 detectors, none of them worked against all of the detectors simultaneously. So an easy solution would then be a combination of multiple of them, but perhaps also a redesign would be possible. So yeah, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. Any questions?
Thank you for your presentation. Nice work, important topic. Though, have you tried other fault injection methods on the circuits that you have experimented with? And second question is that I see you focus on a specific class of glitch detectors. What was the reasoning, or if you had tried on other types of glitch detectors, and what was the results? Thanks.
So the first answer, we haven't tried any other methods. And just to address voltage glitching, I don't think it would be possible to use voltage glitching in this setting because it requires fairly fast changing signals and so on. And while voltage glitching can cause timing violations, you don't get these rapid changes in the same way. However, maybe EMFI could be an interesting topic because one can also use that to inject spikes in clock signals and so on. So that might get you around the I/O circuitry and this challenging of not having access to the clock signal. And then the second question, what was that again?
Have you tried other classes of glitch detectors as the target?
No. Yeah, and just to explain why we chose them. So it seemed like a popular range of designs. So, for instance, one of them is deployed in Intel processors and so on. Once you start looking at one, you kind of have to look at all of them because they are so similar. And yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Another question is here.
Thank you for your talk. It was good. I have a question about your glitch signal. You said it was internally generated. Can you elaborate a little bit more about how you created it and how you verified that you were getting the signal that you thought you were on the clock?
Yeah. So it was generated using Xilinx primitives, so these MMCMs. And it's based on using multiple square wave signals that we phase shift dynamically and combine them and so on to form these signals. How we verify them? So it's when it's done internally, we can't see the signals obviously, but we've also done this with 2 different boards, and then we've also had a look at the signals naturally using scopes and so on. Yeah, we can also keep in mind that these are fairly fast. So while doing the actual experiments, if you also measure the signals, the impedance is sufficient enough to mess up the experiment. So yeah, but we have checked them with the scope.
Ami?
Very short question. Did I understand correctly with double glitch attack, you inject really 2 faults also in the underlying cryptographic device? Or no, it happens only for the clock glitching or glitch detecting circuit?
Well, they're positioned on the same FPGA, so both things are affected. So we primarily just use whether or not the ciphertext is incorrect to determine if there's been a fault, and thus not sort of looking for multiple faults. But in the paper, we also have some experiments with where we perform a DFA attack, and then we get faults in, like single byte faults in round 8 and so on. Does that answer the question?
I'm concerned about whether 2 faults, that you inject into the target cryptographic scheme, may challenge the DFA that you may have. Yeah, because you have some assumptions for the fault that you want to actually have. Yeah, and then by injecting 2 faults to overcome the glitch detector circuit, you may end up in some kind of faults that they don't fit to the model that you want, and they cannot be used for the attack that you have.
Yeah, sure. It's sort of difficult to know what kind of faults you provoke, but at least for this attack number 3 that used a double glitch attack, we did perform DFA attacks.
Okay, thank you.
Although I'd like to add with a fairly low success rate for the.
Okay, so Mike, hi, thanks for the talk. Yeah, you already mentioned that you need fairly quickly changing signals and so on. So I completely believe that you can do this, like if you generate the manipulated clock on the FPGA itself. If you do it like in a real attack setting, assuming you actually have access to a clock from outside, would you still be able to pull it off, or do you have too much impedances and then whatever parasitics? Like, did you try it like with an SMA connected clock or something?
Well, yeah, we have done that at least for FPGAs. But it's a good question, and ideally, of course, we would have liked to test it on ASICs and so on. But yeah, I guess my answer would be that for the faster the circuit, the more difficult. So for like the cutting edge process nodes and so on, I would say this is not applicable.
No, so I don't mean like a target where the clock runs very fast. I'm just wondering if, like, from one device over cables, over PCB tracks, over pads, no, do you get the clock glitches in there quickly enough actually to do it?
Yeah, we have some experiments on that. So that using SMA connectors, as you say,
Yeah.
and then solder them to the IO pads and so on.
Okay.
And also for those, we can also lower the supply voltage of the target to sort of help out with the timing a bit.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? I have a naive question. All these glitch detector circuits are all designed for timing validation, like if because of voltage glitch, timing, or I don't know, EMFI. Does it help if we come up with extra glitch detector for clock itself, and then somehow combine them or monitor both, like the timing violation and clock? But of course, I guess you need an internal clock or something like that. Have you thought about it?
Sorry, what do you mean? Like another detector
for the
only
clock
the
itself?
Signal, that with a different type of design.
No, I know. It's just a question that do you think that that could help to overcome this one? Adding another glitch detector, but optimized for the clock itself, not timing violations.
Yes, I think so. But also when, at least in the way I use the terms, applying a short clock period is also a timing violation. So they sort of detect the same thing.
I guess the difference would be then your glitch detectors are running on a clock, which is assumed to be very clean and untampered. But probably my question was if there is any possibility to have a detector with maybe an internal reference signal instead of outside signal to detect maybe also the healthiness of the clock itself, and then but yeah, I guess it's very hypothetical.
But I think it's a good point. And also a PLL naturally would protect against this, and you have a locked signal and so on that you can.
Okay, great, thank you. No other questions? All right, I guess we have now about 6 or 7 minutes to switch between the tracks. Let's thank Amund again.